I want to start by saying I understand how this sounds. I've been a state trooper for 9 years, and I know the difference between a reliable witness and an unreliable one. I know how trauma distorts memory. I know how a person in shock can misremember sequence, duration, detail. I've taken hundreds of accident statements, and I know every way a story can fall apart. This story doesn't fall apart. That's the problem. My name is Trooper Aaron Vance. On the night of October 14th, I responded to a single vehicle accident on Interstate 77 southbound near mile marker 214. A sedan had gone off the road and hit the tree line on the right shoulder. The driver, a man named Paul Whitfield, 41, was out of the vehicle when I arrived, standing on the shoulder, physically unharmed. The car was totaled. No skid marks on the road, which meant he hadn't braked before going off. Standard approach: secure the scene, check the driver, get the story. Paul Whitfield was shaking when I got to him, but coherent. No signs of impairment. Pupils normal, speech clear, balance steady. He knew his name, the date, where he'd been going. Shock, but functional. I asked him what happened. He said there had been a woman in the road, not an animal, not debris. A woman, standing in the center lane of the interstate, facing his car. He'd seen her in his headlights with enough time to register what she was, swerved hard to the right to avoid her, and lost control into the trees. My first thought was that he'd hit a pedestrian and she'd fled. I asked if he'd made contact. He said no, he was sure he'd missed her. I asked where she went after he swerved. He said he'd lost her from his field of vision before he hit the trees. A pedestrian on I-77 at 2 a.m. on a rural stretch. Unusual, not impossible. I called it in and started checking the road surface. No blood, no clothing, no debris from a secondary collision. Road surface clean in both directions. I went back to Paul and asked him to describe her. White dress, dark hair, long and loose, barefoot, standing completely still, arms at her sides, facing his headlights. And the expression, he said, was what he remembered most. She looked like she was expecting him. I wrote all of this down. Then I asked how long before the accident he'd first seen her. He said about 4 seconds. At highway speed, roughly 70 miles per hour, 4 seconds of reaction time covers approximately 400 feet, which meant she was standing roughly 400 feet north of the impact point when he first saw her. I walked the road, exactly 400 feet north of impact, on the white shoulder line where she should have been standing. I found footprints, bare footprints in the dust and grit at the edge of the road. 2 prints, side by side, facing south. The exact direction his headlights had been coming from. I stood on that highway at 2:30 in the morning, and I looked at those footprints and I ran through what I knew. First thought, someone was on the road. He swerved to avoid her. She walked away before I arrived. Straightforward. The footprints confirmed the pedestrian. Unusual, but explainable. Except there were only 2 footprints, not a trail, not tracks showing someone walking or running. 2 prints, side by side, of someone standing still. No prints approaching from anywhere. No prints leaving in any direction. As if whoever made them had appeared in that spot and then simply ceased to be there. I searched a 50-foot radius with my flashlight. Hard shoulder, soft verge, tree line at the edge. No other footprints, no disturbance in the grass. Nothing. I stood there and I felt, for the first time in 9 years of night patrol, genuinely unable to fit what I was seeing into any category I had. A trooper does not use words like impossible. We use words like undetermined. But standing there on that highway, flashlight in hand, looking at two footprints with no approach and no departure, I understood for the first time why civilians use the word impossible. Because that is what it was. There was no physical mechanism by which those two footprints could exist in isolation on that road surface. None. I went back to Paul and told him what I'd found. I watched his face. He did not look relieved. He did not look vindicated. He looked like a man who just had his worst fear confirmed. His jaw tightened, and he looked away from me toward the tree line where his car had come to rest. And for a moment, I could see him doing the same thing I'd been doing, turning the evidence over, trying to make it fit. He said he'd known something was wrong with her from the moment he saw her. Not wrong like injured. Wrong like something about her didn't work the way things are supposed to. The way she was standing, the complete stillness, and the way she was looking directly into his headlights, not blinded, just looking, like she knew he was coming, like she was waiting for him specifically. I wrote that down too. The accident report uses the phrase source of footprints undetermined. That phrase is doing a great deal of work. It is covering for the absence of any physical explanation for how two bare footprints came to exist on that road surface with no trail in and no trail out. I chose that phrase carefully because I am a trooper and I write what the evidence supports, and the evidence supports undetermined. What the evidence does not support, and what I have spent 2 years refusing to write anywhere official, is what I actually believe happened. She was 400 feet north of the point of impact. He swerved right to avoid her. That put her to his right when he left the road, which means when the car went into the trees, she was between the car and the tree line. He said he'd missed her, but there were no footprints leaving anywhere. I've run the physics of that swerve trajectory 100 times. I know where she would have been when the car hit the trees. I know what the hood of that car looked like when I got there. I know what the tree line looked like at the point of impact. I'm not going to put what I think in writing, but I'll tell you this. 2 years later, I still drive that stretch of I-77 on regular patrol. Every time I pass mile marker 214, I slow down a little. I look at the tree line, and I think about Paul Whitfield saying she looked like she was expecting him. I think about 2 footprints with nowhere to go. I think about a woman in a white dress standing in the headlights of an oncoming car in the middle of the night, completely still, not flinching, not running, waiting. And I think about what she was waiting for, and I don't have an answer that fits inside any report I've ever written. And some nights, that's the last thing I think about before the sun comes up. I've been doing this job for 14 years, and I have a rule. I don't talk about the things that don't fit. Not with my wife, not with other officers, not with anyone. You develop a filter after enough years on the job. You learn to triage what stays in your head and what you let go of. Letting go is how you last. I'm breaking that rule tonight because what happened on rural Route 9 in March has not let go of me 14 months later, and it still wakes me up sometimes. And I've decided that something I can't shake deserves to be said out loud, even if I'm the only one who believes it. My name is Deputy Miles Calder. What I'm about to tell you is not in any official report. You'll understand why. The call came in at 11:40 at night. Welfare check. A farmhouse on Route 9. A woman named Carol Bright had called to say her daughter Sandra hadn't shown up for Sunday dinner and wasn't answering her phone. Sandra lived alone out on Route 9, a 20-minute drive from town, had some history of depression, and Carol was worried. Standard welfare check. I've done hundreds of them. I pulled up to the farmhouse at 12:08 in the morning. Single story, old but maintained. Porch light on, lights on inside too, visible through the front windows. That was actually a good sign. A lit house usually means someone's home. I knocked. Standard knock, 3 times, police, welfare check. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. Mid-30s, brown hair, barefoot, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. She looked tired, but she looked fine. She said her name was Sandra Bright and asked what was going on. I told her mother had called, was worried she hadn't shown up to dinner. Sandra said she was sorry, she'd lost track of time. She'd call her mom right now. She seemed embarrassed. A little out of it, but fine. I asked her the standard questions. Was she okay? Had anything happened? Was she safe? She said yes to all of them. She smiled at me. She thanked me for coming out. I noted the time, 12:11, wrote down the welfare check as completed, subject located, and in good health. I walked back to my cruiser. I was reaching for the door handle when my radio went off. Dispatch, calling my unit number, telling me that while I was en route, they had received a follow-up call from Carol Bright, telling me that Carol Bright had just been informed by Sandra's co-worker that Sandra had not come into work on Friday, that her car was still in the parking lot at her workplace, that no one had seen or heard from Sandra Bright since Thursday evening. I stood next to my cruiser in the dark, and I read back what I had just written in my notepad. 12:11. Welfare check completed. Subject located, in good health. Sandra Bright, brown hair, barefoot, flannel shirt, smiled at me, thanked me for coming out. My hand was shaking when I keyed the radio. I don't shake on calls. In 14 years, I have not shaken on a call. My hand was shaking. I told dispatch I needed to go back to the door. I told them to hold. I got out of the cruiser and I walked back to that porch and I knocked again. And I waited and nobody answered. I knocked again. Nothing. I looked through the front window. The lights that had been on were still on. The room was visible, a living room. And furniture, a lamp, no one in it. I tried the door. It was locked. The door I had spoken to Sandra Bright through 11 minutes ago was now locked from the inside. I called for backup, and I waited, and when my backup arrived, we went in through a window. We cleared every room. The house was empty. No one there, no sign of recent occupation. The kind of emptiness that meant no one had been in that house for days. Dust on the kitchen counter. No food in the trash. A fine layer of undisturbed grime on the bathroom faucet handles. Nobody had been living in that house. Nobody had answered that door. And yet I had spoken to her. I had looked at her face. I had heard her voice. I had watched her smile and thank me and close the door, and I had written down her name in my own handwriting in my notepad at 12:11 in the morning. Sandra Bright was found 4 days later. I won't tell you where, because her family doesn't need that detail repeated. She had been dead since Thursday. The coroner's report put time of death at some time Thursday evening, approximately 60 hours before I stood on her porch at midnight and watched her answer the door. I have read that report. I have held it in my hands and read every word. And then I drove back out to Route 9 on a day off, and I sat in my car in front of that farmhouse, and I thought about a dead woman coming to her own door in her bare feet, to thank a deputy for checking on her, I thought about why she would do that, what it would take to do that, whether she knew what she was, whether she was trying to communicate something, or whether she was doing what she always did when someone knocked, just answering. Just being polite the way she apparently always was, because everyone who knew Sandra Bright said the same thing about her, that she was unfailingly kind, that she always made people feel welcome, that she would have been embarrassed to think she'd caused anyone worry. That's the part that broke me a little. Not the impossibility of it, the character of it. She apologized for missing dinner. She said she'd lost track of time. She thanked me for coming out. Whatever came to that door, it was still her. Enough of her to be embarrassed, to be apologetic, to be grateful. Enough of her to smile at a deputy and reassure him everything was fine, because that was who she was. And whatever she was by then, she was still, in some part, who she had always been. I've done 14 years of welfare checks. I've found people in bad situations. I've found people who didn't want to be found. I've delivered news that changed families forever. I have never once, before or since, had a subject thank me at the door. I think about that sometimes on night shifts, driving dark roads alone. I think about Sandra Bright's smile. I think about how she said she'd call her mom. I think about the fact that she never did. And I wonder sometimes whether she knew. Whether standing at that door in her bare feet, she understood what had happened to her. Whether the smile was real or whether it was the last polite thing she had left. Whether saying thank you was the only goodbye she got to give. I hope it was enough. I hope she knew someone came to check. I hope she knew someone was looking for her, because she deserved that. Whatever she was at 12:11 on that porch, she deserved that much. "7 years on the job, and I've never talked about this call. Not to my partner, not to my supervisor, not to my husband. I filled out incident reports that left things out, and I've driven past that street 100 times since without ever saying out loud what I saw that night. I'm saying it now because I think someone else out there needs to hear that this kind of thing happens. That people trained to deal with reality sometimes encounter things that don't fit inside it, and that the paperwork doesn't have a box for what I'm about to describe. My name is Officer Dana Reeves, and I want to be clear, this is not an official account of anything. The call came in at 2:17 in the morning, November, a Tuesday, in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside Columbus. The kind of neighborhood where nothing happens. And the most frequent calls are noise complaints and the occasional fender bender in the Kroger parking lot. A woman named Patricia Hollis had called from her house on Orchard Lane to report a person standing in the street in front of her neighbor's house. Number 47. She said the person had been there for at least an hour, not doing anything, just standing. I was the closest unit. I turned onto Orchard Lane with my lights off, the way I usually did on night calls to residential areas. No need to wake the whole block. It was cold, the kind of cold that sits in your chest, and the street was completely still. Most of the houses were dark. A few porch lights were on. I saw it immediately. In front of 47 Orchard Lane, at the edge of the driveway where it met the street, there was a figure, standing with its back to me, facing the house, in dark clothing, perfectly still. I pulled to the curb about 3 houses down and called it in. Dispatch confirmed the original complaint. I told them I had eyes on the subject and was approaching on foot. I got out of the cruiser and unsnapped my holster. Not drawing, just ready. This is standard for any unknown subject call at 2 a.m. I was calm, 7 years on nights, and I was as calm as I've ever been on a call at that moment. It was just a person standing in a residential street. I had handled this 100 times. I walked toward the figure, staying on the sidewalk. When I was about 30 feet away, I called out, "Police, I need you to turn around and show me your hands." The figure didn't move. I called out again, same words, louder. My hand was on my holster now. Nothing. I closed the distance to about 15 feet. And that was when I realized something was wrong with what I was seeing, something I had registered at 30 feet, but my brain had been working hard to explain away. The figure was too still. I don't mean standing still, I mean completely, absolutely, impossibly still. No movement of breath, no shift of weight, no micro movement. People standing still move. There's always the chest rising and falling, the small, continuous adjustments the body makes to maintain balance. This figure had none of that. It stood with the rigidity of something that did not breathe and did not need to balance, because balance requires ongoing adjustment, and this thing was not making any. It was not alive in the way that living things are alive. I stopped walking. Everything I had been trained to do said, keep approaching, keep talking, follow protocol. Everything in me below the level of training said, do not get closer. Those two instructions had never been in direct conflict in 7 years. They were in direct conflict right then, and it took me about 2 seconds to decide which one to follow. I did not get closer. I said, in as steady a voice as I could manage, "Sir, I need you to acknowledge me. Turn around, show me your hands." Nothing. I keyed my radio and told dispatch I had an unresponsive subject at 47 Orchard and was requesting backup. Dispatch said backup was en route. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes. I stood on the sidewalk 15 feet from this thing, and I did not move. It did not move. The cold was very loud in the absence of any other sound. I watched the back of that figure for 6 minutes, and it did not breathe once. That's not an impression. That's not me misreading what I saw. I was watching a human-shaped figure from 15 feet away in cold November air, the kind of air where you can see breath. I watched for 6 minutes. There was no breath. Backup arrived after exactly 6 minutes. 2 units, 2 officers I had known for years. They turned onto the street with their lights on this time, flooding the area with harsh white light. I turned my head to look at them, just for a split second. When I turned back, the figure was gone. It didn't run. It didn't walk away. It simply wasn't there anymore. 1 second it had been standing motionless at the end of the driveway. When I looked back, the spot was empty. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My heart was still hammering. The 2 officers stepped out of their cars, hands on their weapons, scanning the area. Just one of them glanced at me, his eyes asking a silent question. There was no one on the street, no one on any lawn, no sound of footsteps, no shadow disappearing into a backyard or bushes. Only empty space where the figure had been standing 15 feet away. We checked the yard. We checked the immediate vicinity. We knocked on the door of number 47, and the resident, a man in his 60s named Gerald Watts, answered, looking confused and tired. He said he had no idea anyone had been standing in front of his house. I asked if he knew anyone who might stand in his driveway at 2 a.m. He said no. I asked if he had any security cameras. He said no. I asked if anything unusual had happened recently at the house. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said his wife had passed away 6 weeks ago, that this was their house for 38 years, that she had been standing in that exact spot in the driveway the last time he saw her walk out the front door. He said it was the spot at the end of the driveway where she always stood to wave at the neighbors. She had a habit of it, standing there in the morning when the neighbors left for work just to wave, and all the neighbors had known it and looked for her every morning. I stood on that doorstep and felt something cold settle deep in my stomach. Gerald Watts looked at me with the eyes of a man who was not surprised that I had knocked. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't know what to say to a resident. The words I had been trained to use simply weren't there. The paperwork I filed that night describes an unresponsive subject who fled the scene prior to the arrival of backup units. That's what it says. That's what I wrote. I've driven past 47 Orchard Lane many times since then. During the day, it's just a house. A nice house with a tidy lawn and a driveway that curves slightly at the bottom where it meets the street. I've never driven past it at night. I've never looked at that spot at the end of the driveway after dark, because I'm afraid that if I do, she'll still be there, standing the same way she always stood, waiting for someone to wave back.